is the video on report writing for home educating parents in the UK that I have been promising for a really long time. And the reason it's taken me so long is because it's really important and I don't want to up for you. I have literally seen people writing in groups on Facebook that they have been put off even trying to start home educating because they are worried about the report writing process that they've heard so much about. And reading things like that makes me so sad because it is really important, but it is also totally doable by anyone. I have put in hours of research into this, both for when I was writing my own reports and specifically for this video, hours scripting it to make sure I cover everything for you. And can I just say right now, the editing is also kicking my... I've got 54 minutes of footage and I'm only 5 minutes and 26 seconds into the edit. My biggest hope is that it will take away some of the stress and anxiety that people often experience around the whole process. Okay, I'm going to start with some really important points and they sort of underpin everything else that is to come in this video. So I'll go over those in a minute. Then I'm going to talk about how you might choose to structure your report. Then I'm going to talk over some do's and some don'ts. Then a key strategy to use when writing reports with some actual examples as well. Okay, so before we move on to how to structure your reports, this is important point to remember, number one. And this point I actually came across in the book, The Home Ed Guide You Didn't Know You Needed, which I also made a video about. If you'd like to see a full review, I will link it in a card and also in the description. And this is, when it comes to report writing, you need to go with local over national guidance. Let me explain this. So there is general guidance provided by different home ed groups about how to write reports, how much detail you should go into, etc. But it's important before you get into that to check in with your local home ed group and find out about how your local LA operates, or how the LA that you are under operate. For example, if you find out through discussions with your local home ed community that your local authority is actually super chilled about reports and people get away with just sending a few lines about what they're doing and a couple of resources and they very rarely ask for more information, you don't want to send in a more detailed report than is necessary, because you could then create a situation where you're giving the local authority new expectations about how much information they should receive from home educating families. As Ellen puts it in the book, they can start making increasing demands for more detailed information where they were previously happy with less. Or you generally end up putting a lot more time and energy into the reports than is actually needed, time and energy which is taken away from your actual home educating life. So I think once you've confirmed what your local authority is like, then you can move on to using more national guidance in order to write your reports. Okay, so the second point to bear in mind as we go through this is that how detailed your report is also going to depend on whether this is your first report or a follow-up report, because you're likely to go into a lot more detailed information in your first report than you are in the annual follow-ups that will come after that. But according to a recent poll I put up on my community tab, 70% of you have never written a report before. So the rest of this video is really going to be based on writing your first report. Okay, quick disclaimer before we move on. This is not legal advice, it is a general overview from one person who has done a ton of research, and I've written 2 reports for my twins. So this is not the gospel on report writing, it is one resource of many available from one person, but I do think it's going to be really useful for you. If you've clicked on this video or actually searched on how to write reports, you've probably already decided that you're going to write a report. But briefly, and I think it's good to keep in mind while we're doing it, we write reports to provide the local authority with enough information, and no more than that, for them to assess that our children are not in their remit. Their duty is towards children not receiving an education. And so we need to provide evidence, an important word that we'll come on to in more detail, that they are, and then move on with our lives. Okay, cool. Now we have all those things to bear in mind. Let's move on with the main meat of the video. I'm a vegetarian. Let's get on to the tofu of the video. Section 1, structure. I know a lot of you are going to want some guidance on how to structure your reports, because I do find that once you have even a few headings, it does help you bang out some of your thoughts in a more sort of methodical and coherent way. Now, your structure is going to depend on a couple of things, including what style of learning you're doing. So if you're able to break it down into headings like numeracy, literacy, geography, science, etc., you can do that. Or if you take a more project-based approach, then you will probably break it down into sections under each project and talk about all the different learning that's taking place within those projects. So I'm going to give you an example structure, like exactly how I structured out my report. If you are unschooling, then the structure might seem a bit trickier to formulate, and you can essentially do it how you wish. But you might also find that you benefit from breaking it down into typical subject headings and then talking about how those are covered in different aspects of your life and your child's interests. So let's get on with an example structure, and this is one that I use for my twins' first reports. If you don't know already, just to give some context, I'm a home educating mum to 3 children. So I have twins who are now coming up to 6.5 and their little brother who is 3.5. So I've written one report for each of my twins, and that was based on about the first 6 months after they reached compulsory school age. Okay, let's really go basic step by step, and I'm sorry if this actually comes off like patronising, like obviously we're going to write that, but I know it can be like really overwhelming, and sometimes you just need someone to be like, right, write their name and the date. Just for me at least, having it really spelled out for me in that way did help, so I hope you find it useful. So your report could look something like this. The title: EHE report for Oliver Twist. Their date of birth: 1st of January 1838. Fill in as appropriate. Today's date: 18th of April 2024. Education approach: about Oliver Twist, and then education: numeracy, literacy, science, geography, foreign languages, ICT, for example, followed by social opportunities, and then a list of all the resources that your child has available to them. Okay, let's go into each one by one and talk about what you might want to include in each of the sections. So, education approach. This can be very brief, and it's just really about describing your educational philosophy. Sort of, what do you think is the point of education? Why do you think we should be educated, and how does that look like in your family? Are you taking a semi-structured approach? Are you more child-led, etc.? You don't need to put too much detail into this section. About your child. Now, this is probably going to vary somewhat depending on the age of your child, and obviously, like, it's going to vary a lot from child to child. Even my twins ones were really different. I've only written for very young children, so that looked like what are they currently interested in, how they seem to like to learn or respond best to learning. If you have much older children than I do, then you might be starting to talk about future aspirations. You might want to include whether they have any additional needs that you think it's important for the LA to know about. Again, this section can be brief, which I know doesn't help you write it by just saying it. You don't have to write much. But just try and start by listing all the things that they like. They like playing football, they like playing Minecraft, they enjoy painting, they are really interested in history or boats, that sort of thing. And then you can go on to, for example, they seem to prefer learning in small groups, or they prefer learning by watching videos and then talking about what they've watched, or actually they love working through this curriculum that we brought and they respond really well to that, having more structure. You know, it's really just about your individual child, so I can't help you too much on that because I don't know your child. Moving on to the main education section, and I'm going to talk you through the structure that I used. So I started off with 2 sections that seems to be advised most people do start with, which is numeracy and literacy, which I will talk about a little bit more why we put those in the do's section. And then, even though we don't actually follow a curriculum, I don't structure our day in terms of set subjects, I did find I was able to write under the headings of science, geography, foreign languages, because we were doing Spanish, and also My husband speaks another language, so that was important to include, and then ICT I used as well. And I will give you some examples of how I worded my descriptions of learning, as it were, under each section when I get onto the last section of this video about how to show progression within your report. Social opportunities is going to be an important one to include because, as we know, everyone likes to think that home ed kids don't socialise. So you might want to talk about some of the local home ed park meetups you've attended, any workshops that your children have gone to, or have they been socialising with school kids at after school activities? What opportunities do they have during the day that lets them interact with all the varying people of the world? And if it's the case that actually your child has found it really difficult to socialise despite the opportunities available to them, you can write about how you have been, I don't know, like working through social anxiety issues. But as long as you are demonstrating that they have the opportunities provided to them to do that. So it might even be like, we went along to a park meet and Oliver only wanted to stay 5 minutes, but this was a big improvement because in the past he's refused to go to anything. Like, that's still showing that they have social opportunities available to them and that they are progressing within those opportunities. And lastly, you can finish off giving a list of resources that are available to your child to access. In my report, I broke this down into trips and workshops that we've been on and literally just listed the name of each trip and each workshop. I had another section for books, another section for clubs slash classes that they've been attending. I had a section for online learning. For example, you could put YouTube, Theatre of Science channel. That is a resource available to your child. And then other learning resources, that's going to be quite age dependent. For example, in mine, I had like Play-Doh, Lego, different puzzles that we've been using. We have some like tactile letters where they can feel the shape of the letter, things that didn't necessarily fall into those other categories. And when writing your report, I have some very important do's and don'ts that I want to talk about next, which I think will help you. Okay, so I'll start off with this one because it relates somewhat to the structure we just talked about. And my first do is talk about literacy and numeracy rather than English and maths. And do put them at the top of your report. Now, the reason for this is because it seems to be what most LAs kind of care the most about, because these two areas are really the ones that help us operate in society as fully functioning human beings. Our ability to read and communicate and write. And the reason you don't want to be putting maths and English is because maths and English are school-based academic subjects, and you don't have to do school-based academic subjects at home, but you do want to demonstrate that your child is progressing in numeracy and literacy. So maths in school might look like how to work out the area of a triangle or knowing your 9 times table for the younger kids, but numeracy in the real world could look like knowing how much we will save on this 15% off offer at the supermarket, how we're going to manage our finances to ensure that we have the budget for that supermarket shop in the first place, my daily struggle. English as an academic subject might look at how to identify metaphors or analyse the works of Shakespeare, but literacy is about being able to read the instructions on medications and know how much and when we should take those medications based on our circumstances, being able to ring up the GP to make an appointment and query test results. Can you tell I went to the GP yesterday? But numeracy and literacy are areas that are going to help us in all of our daily interactions. So for example, you might in the literacy section talk about the classic home ed activity of baking a cake and how they were able to read the instructions, and numeracy might include in that baking of the cake how they were able to read the amounts and weigh them out and then read how long they had to bake the cake for example. But yeah, do include numeracy and literacy as priorities in your report. Okay, the next do that I want to talk to you guys about is do run a spelling and grammar and punctuation check on your report. Now, no one is going to expect you to sound like a teacher, or that you've hired a professional editor and that you clearly have a degree in English. But having said that, this is a formal document that is going to be held on record for a certain amount of time, and some LAs might take umbrage with poor spelling, punctuation, and not using capitalization correctly. I don't say this to get you worried if spelling, punctuation and grammar is not your strong point. Like, I don't think there is a word processor that exists today that does not have a basic spell check, and there are software options like Grammarly, which often have free trials or a basic package that you can sign up to that will run a spell check, give you suggestions on grammar, and then just make sure things like place names and your child's name are capitalized correctly, and you'll be fine. But it is something to keep in mind, like run a spell check. Okay, and moving on to some don'ts, and I think these are potentially more important than the do's, so bear with me. And the last one is kind of tricky to get your head around, but I will try and explain it properly. So the first don't in report writing is don't just write what you've done. Like, Oliver completed a CPG workbook. Just saying what you've done isn't showing the progression he has made as a result of that. And I'm going to give you some examples of how progression might look in the final section of this video. But probably if there is one thing to take away from this video, it is progression, progression, progression. How are you showing that they've actually progressed? And that isn't just by saying what they've done. More on that to come. Second don't put your future plans. So you need to show the progression up until where they are in their education right now, not what you are intending to do in the future, because we all know plans can change. And if you have listed out all these things that you are planning to do and the LA decide to be awkward, like in their follow-up, how did that maths course go that you said you were going to do, and how did learning Spanish go that you said you were going to do, and oh, why haven't you done that? Like we said, we are trying to demonstrate to them that our children are receiving a full-time education suitable to their age and needs. We do not need to be listing all these amazing things we have planned coming up and having the LA hold us accountable to those plans. Okay, next one, and I think this is really important. Don't send in pictures of your children and or their work as evidence. That is their work, their intellectual property, and there is no need to be sharing pictures of your children with people you've likely never met before. The evidence is your written report. And I know that can be hard to get your head around. Like, how can just my word be evidence? But you are the one responsible for their education, and so your written word is the evidence that that education is being achieved. If it helps, like, you think about it, even at schools, most of the time you will get a written report from a teacher at the end of a term or end of a year, and that for the most part is the only evidence that you have that your child is progressing in their education. You know, they might come home with bits of work from time to time, or you might observe that they've learned something new, but ultimately what the teacher has to provide to you comes in the form of a written report, and that is equally what we are doing to the LA. Our written word is the evidence. That is all the evidence we need to provide to the LA, and many LAs I have read do try and request or tell you you need to provide pictures of their work as evidence. You don't. Like, your word is the evidence. Okay, this last one is a bit more like you have to get your head around it, and I struggle with it, but the last don't I'm going to talk about right now is don't educate in order to write a report. Let's talk about that bit. And it is so hard not to do. I struggle with it, and it's definitely a mindset shift change that you need to try and work on, or not let yourself get into. And that is not letting the need to write reports dictate how you educate and what you cover within your education, or to start home educating in a way that you think will please the local authority when you write about in the report. A good quote I read, which I wish I knew the source of, I'm going to hazard a guess it was on Heifer Facebook site. The education has to be suitable to your child, not to the local authority. So you don't want to get into the mindset of like, oh, we'll do this today because that will be really good to write about in the report. You want to be thinking, oh, we'll do this today because my child has expressed interest in it and we have decided as a family that it will be good for their education. And you know, there are definitely plenty of things that I will make a mental note of, or even a physical note if you have decided to keep like a physical track of your journey for your own personal benefit, that I'll think, oh, that thing would be good to include in the report to show progression. But that happens after the fact. I don't do it because I want something including in the report. So I will give you a brief story which might help conceptualise this a bit more. We went to the Lego store over Easter. Don't ask me why. I thought it was a good idea to go to a toy store in the middle of the Easter holidays, but we did, and they actually had quite a cool activity on where children could take a sheet and walk around finding different letters of the alphabet made out of Lego, and if they put them in the correct order on their sheet it would spell out a Lego person's name, and then they got a free Lego person at the end. So my kids were obviously really keen to do that. Now, as a result of this, I observed that one of my children's handwriting had like dramatically improved from what I last knew it to be, and I thought, oh, that's demonstrable progress that I could write about in the report. And I did take a picture of it for my own personal sanity, just so I don't have to remember everything in hindsight. And again, the progress part is a really important keyword that will come on into the next section. But this happened as a result of our normal day out. Like, if I had purposely tried to engineer a handwriting experience to either teach my child handwriting or check up on their handwriting, like this particular child would have seen it coming a mile off and been completely not interested. Just because I thought that might be something to put in a report, it wouldn't have been a good way to enhance my child's education. And like I said, this isn't easy, and it's really a mindset thing more than anything, of not letting the need to write reports dictate how you home educate. That should be dictated by other factors, which I won't go into this video. So we had, don't just list what you've done, don't put future plans, don't send in pictures of your children and all their work, and don't home educate in order to write reports. And in order to help you with this first one, don't just write what you've done, you need to show progression. Let's get into the last and arguably most important part of the video, the key winning formula to writing your reports. Like I've said probably way too many times in this video already, the key takeaway you want from all of this is that you need to be able to show progression in your reports. And progression is probably going to look something like, what can they do now that they couldn't do before? And this might be because of a particular activity you undertook, because your child deep dived into a particular interest of theirs, or because you were just going about living your life and they made progression organically that way. But the way that you can put this can go something as follows: the before, the activity, the learning, and what the progression was. So I'm going to put those steps into a couple of real examples for you to show you how that might be written into a report. And this is obviously going to have to be individualized to your child. Okay, so the before. Oliver Twist. Oliver knew that we should not drop litter, but not particularly why. The activity. We read a book called Clean Up, which by the way is an excellent book if that is age appropriate to your child. Now, you might think it's satisfactory just to stop there. You didn't know about the importance of why we drop litter, so we read this book, but that isn't showing the progression. So we go on to say, as a result of reading this book, he learnt that if you drop litter, it can do damage to our oceans and our ocean animals. Is that a term? You know what I'm getting at. And then we go on to demonstrate the progression. Next time we were at the beach, she wanted to pick up a piece of litter because it could hurt an animal. So we went from the before, he knew that we shouldn't drop litter, to the progression. He actively showed an understanding of this because he wanted to pick up some litter, and he told me it was because it can hurt animals. Let's go on to another one, and this one I really love because, so this is a fellow home ed parent that I know, and we'd been talking about report writing because she knew I was having to do mine for my twins. and she was worried. I will actually tell you exactly the worry. Like, she was like, I'm worried ours won't, because we don't do any formal classes or work, no tests or anything. So she was worried that she wouldn't be able to articulate the learning in a report fashion. Now, she just so happens to have like an awesome Instagram account about home education, which I highly suggest you follow if that's your type of thing. So it's called Unschooling with PDA. Honestly, really, like, I was binging the account because she has some great stuff about just like loads of cool resources. Even if you aren't unschooling or don't have a child with PDA, I really think it's useful. Yeah, just some great ideas on here. And as I was just like devouring all of her posts, I was seeing so many good examples of things that she could almost put word for word in a report, because they were just perfectly demonstrating this like formula of progression, as we will call it. I'm going to go over one example to demonstrate this further. Okay, so the before part of our equation in this circumstance might look something like Leo is able to work out sums such as 8 plus 8 is 16 by counting them on his fingers or using cubes or however he was working them out before. So that's your before part. And then your activity is, you know, we've spent some time playing different games which incorporate numeracy, such as the Potty Professor's Orchard Toys game, which can also go on your list of resources. So that's your activity. And the learning might be something like, through this game he learned that 4 times 4 equals 16. And now the key part, the progression, which is the evidence of the learning that took place. Leo showed his understanding of how 4 times 4 equals 16 by saying that 4 plus 4 is 8, and there's 2 piles of those, so 8 plus 8 must be 16. And he has progressed because he is now starting to commit these sums to memory rather than having to work them out every time as he was doing before. If she was putting in a report, she wouldn't just say, we played this game called Potty Professors and it really helped him understand sums better. How she would then be evidencing that learning was because she wrote about the conversation they had, and it demonstrated how he is committing those sums to memory now. Hope that makes sense. Like, another part that I really liked that she could include in a report was, we have also introduced the 2 times table by just counting things in twos when it makes it quicker. With no prompting, he has started doing the same himself. So he went, I presume, from not knowing his 2 times tables, they begun counting in twos just in everyday life, and then he started doing the same. That was his progression. She didn't just stop at, we have started counted in twos. She has evidenced it by showing the progress that he is now doing the same himself, and her word is the evidence. Like, she has some awesome pictures on her Instagram account. She does not need to show those to the LA as evidence of the learning that has taken place. I will sum up with one more example for you from my own report, and yeah, I really hope through those few examples you would have gotten the idea of how to demonstrate to the LA the progression that is taking place. If you have any more questions about that, then feel free to ask. So this final example, and again, you need to bear in mind that my children are still young, so if you have older children, this is just going to sound really basic, but the same principle applies. So my son's name has shown strength in numeracy from the outset, but has also demonstrated improvement over the first 6 months of home education. Initially, before, my child was very confident in identifying numbers up to 10. Since beginning home education, we have begun identifying house numbers as we walk down our road as a means of improving number recognition. That's the activity. He can now identify numbers up to 50. That's the progression. And like I said, I've written one report for each of my twins now, and if you are interested in what the outcome was from that, what the feedback from the LA was in that, then you can find out more about that in this video here. And I really hope this has been useful for you. Do not stress about report writing. I know it is hard, but if you have any further questions, like, ask away in the comments, and if I don't know the answer, I will try and point you in the right direction, or someone else might chip in. Okay, I will catch you on the next video.